Hey everybody, how you doing? Good to see you. See you in air quotes again. Hope everyone is safe and well. I hope things are going well. Obviously, again, I'll say please message me if you have any questions. Some of you have already been doing that, and that's great. I will do the best I can to answer those questions and help you out. These are weird times, so we're going to have to show a lot of patience and a lot of grace toward one another. But we'll get through it. What I wanted to do now is to just walk through some of the characters in the general prologue and give you a little bit more flesh on the bones, so to speak. I realize that the original due date for the Canterbury Tales general prologue assignment is tomorrow, so I think I will likely move that to Friday, just in case some of you have already completed it, and this information might help you fix it up a bit. So I will move it. And again, right, we're going to shoot for the due dates, and this is just crazy, right? So, I mean, you might need another day or whatever, and that's fine. I'm not going to be sitting here, chopping marks off if you're 5 minutes late. Okay, so just do your best. I will do my best, and together we'll make this happen. Okay, so I want to make a couple of general comments before I get to the characters themselves, and I think keep in mind that. Couple of things. One is the genius of Chaucer, and the reason that people still read the Canterbury Tales is because, like great modern writers, Chaucer doesn't tell us what to think. Okay, he doesn't say you should, feel this way about this character, or this character is a bad person, or what Chaucer does is he simply describes them, and he describes what they say, he describes what they do, he describes what they look like. And then he lets you decide what you think about the character. And the way he describes them is what's really, really cool, I think, is he gives you what appears on the surface to be a kind of expected description of a particular figure who does a particular thing for a living. So he tells you what a knight looks like, right? And he tells you what a prioress looks like, and a summoner, and a pardoner, and a manciple, and all the 29 characters that are there. But he does it in a way that there are certain things that kind of undermine the expectations for those characters. So he presents to you on the surface an image of something that looks kind of expected, but underneath there's contradictions, and there's possibilities for interpretation that cast that character in a less than positive light, and in some ways, in some cases, a really negative light. And so the reader has to engage the material in order to really get the most out of it. So what I'm going to try and do is walk through a few of the characters, 5 of them, that are introduced in the general prologue, and try and show you how he does this, okay? How he presents a seemingly normal character and then undermines his own character by presenting details that a careful reader will notice are not really positive. Okay, so we'll start with the knight. The knight is a mercenary, and I'll get to that in a minute. And this is based on popular interpretation. When I was in grad school, I had to read a book called Chaucer's Knight, Portrait of a Medieval Mercenary. And it was written by the late Terry Jones, who some of you will know is a member of the Monty Python troupe. All the guys in Monty Python were extremely intelligent. They were all Oxford or Cambridge educated, and Terry Jones was a medieval scholar. So the guy who read to us Sir William the Green Knight was actually a PhD in this stuff. So, they're not just funny guys, they're smart too. So some of this stuff will be based on Terry's ideas, but I mean, it's a pretty common opinion of this guy. He's a mercenary, he's a soldier for hire. But let's start at the beginning. Chaucer describes the knight first, and what he says about the knight is that he's basically a very good knight as far as a soldier goes. So he fought the world over. He's fought all over Europe, he's fought in Africa, he's fought in the Middle East, and he's very highly regarded from a military point of view. On top of that, Chaucer makes careful note that he embodies these ideas that are central to chivalry, like courtesy and truth, and all the things we talked about with Gawain. So he not only is a good soldier, he kind of acts the ideal role of a chivalric knight. So he appears to be what he should appear to be on the surface. However, if you read carefully, what you find out about the knight is, well, let's say there's a gap. There's a bit of a disconnect between how he appears and what his reputation says about him and what he might actually be. So, we assume he's fought for Christian causes, and we know that he says he's a Christian, otherwise why would he be on a pilgrimage? But Chaucer also tells us he's fought for Muslims, against other Muslims. There's a question mark about whether he might have fought for Muslims against people that weren't Muslims, and maybe even Christians, but we certainly know he's fought for Muslim causes. So that's what makes him a mercenary. He's a paid soldier. He's a gun, or in this case, a sword, for hire. But that's a violation of the chivalric code right there. You don't fight for whoever. You fight for moral good. You fight for right. You fight for Christian values. Right? Gawain would never, if the Green Knight offered him a lot of money, he wouldn't turn around and start doing things for the Green Knight. Right? That would just be unthinkable. But this guy doesn't seem to have a problem with that. So that raises the question to a careful reader, why is this guy on this pilgrimage? Is he there to atone for his sins? Maybe he feels bad about it, and maybe he takes the common medieval view that you can do whatever you want, and if you go to confession, it all gets wiped out. So Paul's, in Romans, when Paul talks about, should we sin more because we know that we have grace? And he says, no. Just because you know you can be forgiven or that you're forgiven doesn't mean that's a license to do whatever you want. But in the Middle Ages, that commonly happened, right? And there's a couple of other characters I'll get to that easily, they'll forgive you for just about anything if you give them enough money. The friar and Gardner and, those two guys and others. So, maybe he's just doing this to make up for his recent campaign of bloodshed and slaughter, and he just intends to go right back to it. Another possibility is that he's doing it just to show, right? It's part of the chivalric image that he's trying to present, right? He earns his money, he fights his wars, and then every once in a while he does something that looks overtly Christian just to make sure that nobody gets confused about, about the PR material he's putting out about himself. Perhaps he really is penitent and he's going to end all this stuff. It's hard to know, but that's the beauty of it, right? Is we're forced to kind of live with these contradictions, and that's what makes him a real person. Right? He's not an idealized figure like Beowulf, right? He's got contradictions, he's got nuance and subtlety. And so do all the rest of the characters, right? So let's move on. Let's take a look at the prioress. She is next up in the list, and her contradiction is she's a religious figure. But she seems a lot more interested in courtly love and romance and all these things that derive from more pagan sources, and or better said, are kind of adaptation of pagan ideas. Remember the chart from Gawain and the Green Knight that I showed you in that screencast. Courtly love is kind of a version of the pagan fertility religion, and it has to do with sexuality, but it's been sort of baptized, in air quotes, Christianized, right? But the prioress is more than she seems to be. If you just read it quickly, then, okay, next. But if you read it closely, she's full of contradictions. So a prioress is the head of a priory, and a priory is a religious order. And because she's a woman, it would be a religious order of nuns. So a convent, or as Hamlet might put it, a nunnery. Someone told her to get to a nunnery, and she did as she was told. But Chaucer introduces some contradictions, and here's the first one. She's wearing an expensive piece of jewelry, which right there raises some questions. But on that expensive piece of jewelry is a Latin phrase, amor vincit omnia. And I'll leave you to look that up. It's not an offensive statement, and it actually looks like a Christian statement, but it actually isn't. It's from Virgil, the guy who wrote the Aeneid, one of the stories of the Trojan War, and he was a thoroughgoing pagan. So she's wearing an expensive piece of jewelry with a pagan symbol or a pagan slogan on it, which raises some interesting eyebrows, perhaps. Chaucer tells us her name's Madame Eglantine. This word has at least two translations. One is it's a type of English rose, which would fit with the courtly romance tradition, because the symbol of courtly romance and chivalry was the rose in a lot of traditions. There's a French work called The Romance of the Rose, which is probably the most important chivalric work from the Middle Ages. So a rose fits in with her chivalric kind of. But rose is also a Christian term. Jesus is referred to as the Rose of Sharon, right? So Jesus is often symbolized using a rose. So she embodies the Christian chivalric part of it with the rose, but if you go back to the derivation of the word, it's also in Old French, it means thorn. And honi soit qui me la pense, the phrase at the end of Sir Gawain, is also Old French. And I'm sure you looked it up. because you will have to know it at some point, so please do so. But it means thorn. Eglantine means thorn in Old French. So is she a thorn in the side of the church? Is she a thorn to chivalric values? I mean, there's that tension, that beautiful tension right there. On the surface, she's a rose. Underneath, she's a thorn. It's a really beautiful image, really clever. So let's move on with her. She has a few more contradictions that are interesting. Makes it clear that she spoils her dogs. She even feeds them off the table, scraps of meat and things. So her dogs eat better than probably half the population in the country. Interesting for someone who's supposed to be about charity and those sorts of things. She cries if she sees a mouse trapped. You know, if a mouse gets caught in a trap, she cries for the poor mouse. She seems very emotional, but her emotions are very overwrought. She's kind of overdoing them, which would fit with her chivalry, her courtly romance, her kind of literary vision of herself. Her emotions are all overdone. Chaucer also uses some interesting figures of speech. The first one is he says that she's not underweight when he talks about her eating habits. Okay, this is just a nice way of saying she's fat. She eats a lot, and it goes straight to her waist, and probably other parts, right? She never leaves food on her plate, he says. She doesn't even leave grease on the glass that she drinks from. She makes sure she gets all the grease off the glass. So she doesn't let anything go when it comes to food. One of the 7 deadly sins is gluttony, and Chaucer, again, doesn't say it, but she sounds a bit gluttonous. Her story, as you'll find out, those of you who are reading it, is a vicious anti-Semitic story. I mean, it's about Jews who are basically bloodthirsty, satanic murderers with no sensitivity to their humanity at all. So she has a lot of feeling for little creatures and things, but she doesn't have a lot of feeling for actual people, especially if they're not like her. So these contradictions create a kind of hypocrisy if you're a careful reader, right? She looks good, but she doesn't really, play the game. She doesn't deliver on the looks, on the appearance, and she's basically a kind of self-absorbed and probably phony person. Chaucer even mentioned she knows French, which is the courtly language, but she doesn't know it because she's been to Paris or she's been, in France. She knows it because she learned it at a French language school in London, Stratford at Bow. So even her French is really kind of subpar and just for show. Pick up the next little bit, the next 3 characters in another video, because this one's getting a little long. So stay tuned.